Taking a bold step today, National Security Advisor John Bolton announcing new sanctions against 3 socialist countries that he dubbed a, quote, triangle of terror. Trace Gallagher on this story for us from the West Coast tonight. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Martha. John Bolton made his comments in Miami, which of course is home to large numbers of migrants from Cuba and Venezuela, many of whom favor stronger U.S. pressure on leftist governments in Latin America, or as Bolton referred to them, quoting, dictators and despots near our shores. In his speech today, the National Security Advisor detailed the executive order signed yesterday by President Trump, which primarily does 2 things. It prevents U.S. citizens from involvement in Venezuela's gold export trade. The administration believes President Nicolas Maduro is using corrupt and deceptive means to export tons of gold to countries like Turkey and Iran. Venezuela desperately needs gold sales to lift its collapsing economy. The executive order also prevents U.S. companies from doing business with more than 24 Cuban entities owned or controlled by the Cuban military or intelligence services. Bolton took a slap at the Obama administration's diplomatic efforts toward Havana, saying the U.S. won't support the Cuban military on the backs of the Cuban people. The administration also promised additional penalties against Nicaragua and said the leaders of all 3 countries should, quote, fear the virtuous power. Watch.
These tyrants fancy themselves strongmen and revolutionaries, icons and luminaries. In reality, they are clownish, pitiful figures more akin to Larry, Curly, and Moe. The 3 stooges of socialism are true believers, but they worship a false god.
Cuba responded by saying the U.S. is punishing the Cuban people based on ideologic intolerance and political revenge. The United Nations also condemned the Cuban embargo, but U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, pushed back, saying the United Nations has failed to condemn the rampant human rights abuses in Cuba. Haley says the U.S. stands with the Cuban people who continue to suffer the lingering effects of the Castro dictatorship. Martha.
Yeah, watch that story. Trace, thank you very much.